Farm Bill, What Does It Mean for Conservation and Sustainable Agriculture? I'm Jennifer Billig on behalf of the Izaak Walton League. I'm appearing on your screen today as Don Maritz, but this is Jennifer Billig on behalf of the Izaak Walton League, and I'm joined by our two presenters, Bill Wenzel, the Agriculture Policy Director for the Izaak Walton League of America, and Greg Fogel, who is the Senior Policy Specialist at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. You're welcome to submit questions during today's webinar using the GoToWebinar control panel that appears on your screen. You can just type in your question there and hit submit. And Bill and Greg will answer as many of your questions as we have time for after their presentation. We're going to start today with Greg Fogel.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. First of all, let me say that this presentation is focused on conservation policy and programs, but conservation is only one facet of sustainable agriculture. We at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition work on most titles of the Farm Bill, from research to rural development, beginning farmer and rancher issues, and conservation. The 2014 Farm Bill, which was recently finalized, reauthorized many major conservation programs and created a couple new conservation programs by consolidating existing programs. And we're going to run through the major programs that come out of that recently completed Farm Bill. I'll start by outlining Farm Bill changes and then provide a timeline for Farm Bill implementation. We still only know part of the picture. There are additional details that we will learn as Farm Bill implementation moves forward. But I do report here on what we know as far as the timeline for implementation goes. But first, the 2014 Farm Bill reauthorized two major working lands conservation programs, one of which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP. EQIP is focused on helping producers implement conservation practices such as cover cropping or fences on farmland, working farmland across the country. The 2014 Farm Bill folded another existing conservation program from the 2008 Farm Bill into EQIP. That other program is the Wildlife Habitat Incentives Program, WIP. So within EQIP now, there will be a 5% floor in funding for what was the Wildlife Habitat Incentives Program. In other words, at least 5% of EQIP funding will be spent on wildlife-related conservation, wildlife habitat-related conservation. The Farm Bill also increased what is called the advance payment from 30% to 50%. This is an advance payment in cost share to beginning farmers and ranchers and minority farmers and ranchers and others with limited resources to purchase the materials necessary to install a particular practice in advance of when other producers would receive that payment. And finally, the 2014 Farm Bill now allows for on-farm research within an EQIP sub-program called the Conservation Innovation Grant Program. The CIG program is administered through EQIP as part of that bigger program. And previously, on-farm research and demonstration was part of the Conservation Stewardship program. So those are the three big changes within EQIP. There are several other changes. The payment limit, overall payment limit for contracts was increased, and a few others. But by and large, EQIP was actually left largely intact. This is what we know in terms of the timeline for implementation. This is information that NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which administers these programs, has communicated. The 2014 sign-up, which has been going on, is mostly complete. Contracts for the 2014 fiscal year, FY that means fiscal year, will be developed in May. And then the interim final rule, that's IFR, for the new program will be out by the end of this summer. That's the first step toward creating or administering the new program that comes out of the 2014 Farm Bill. The IFR is sort of the second step in the implementation process under normal circumstances. Usually a proposed rule comes before an interim final rule. But for most, if not all, conservation programs this time around, because of specific authority given to NRCS in the Farm Bill, they will move directly to an IFR rather than starting with a proposed rule. So there will be a comment period for public comment on the interim final rule when it is issued. So we all will be able to write in and make recommendations to NRCS for how they should implement the program. So I encourage everyone, and then that's true for all programs. So I encourage everyone to stay involved and submit comments on those programs. And then finally, FY15 applications will be ranked by NRCS sometime in the next fiscal year, or early next fiscal year. There will be multiple ranking deadlines across states. There isn't a single ranking deadline. That's when they rank applications for enrollment in the program. Across the country, it's done state by state. So we expect that the first ranking deadline for EQIP will be in October, and then there will be several more throughout the fiscal year. That's for FY15. Next, the Conservation Stewardship Program. CSP is the other major working lands conservation program within the Farm Bill. The Conservation Stewardship Program is actually now the biggest working lands conservation program in terms of acres. There are over 60 million acres enrolled across the country in this program. There were quite a few significant changes to the CSP in the 2014 Farm Bill, more so than the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. However, only 2 of those changes will be implemented for the fiscal year 14 sign-up, which has essentially already happened, the application part of that process. Rather than enrolling 12.8 million acres in fiscal year 14, which was the enrollment cap under the 2008 Farm Bill, the enrollment of new acres will be limited to 10 million acres. So a 2.8 million acre reduction in that program. That's a substantial cut that was made in the 2014 Farm Bill to that program. And secondly, there will be a ranking priority given to expiring CRP acres, and there will be new language that allows producers with expiring CRP acres to enroll in CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, in the final year of their CRP contract. For folks that may not know, CRP is the Conservation Reserve Program. Previously, there hasn't been an easy way for producers with expiring CRP contracts to enroll in CSP during their final year of their contract. They had to wait until their contract expired and then miss a whole year of CSP payments. So that's a change that was made in the 2014 Farm Bill that we're excited about. The priority for expiring CRP acres within the application ranking process, that there are multiple views on that. Our position has been that we're not terribly keen on the idea of including that as a ranking factor. We do like the idea of including language to allow producers to easily transition, but we do have some concerns that by creating this priority for applications, that it will incentivize producers to enroll in CSP rather than re-enroll in CRP, perhaps. It will also unfairly prioritize expiring CRP acres regardless of the environmental benefit produced. So there's some debate around that ranking factor, but we do like the idea of producers being able to seamlessly transition. The other changes that were made to the Conservation Stewardship Program in the 2014 Farm Bill will happen later in fiscal year 2015 and even fiscal year 2016. I list a few of those changes down there. One of the most important changes will be doing more for doing more conservation planning for producers through CSP. So allowing comprehensive conservation plans through the CSP, through the Conservation Stewardship Program, which thus far has not been allowable through CSP. The Conservation Stewardship Program timeline is as follows. We expect applicants, those who applied for CSP before the February 7th, I believe it was, deadline this year, will be notified in late June. That's for the fiscal year 14 sign up. Then the interim final rule for the new program under the Farm Bill, the new Farm Bill, will be out by the end of this summer. Again, that's an opportunity, a programmatic opportunity, policy opportunity to comment on and shape the way that the program is administered. So be looking out for that, and we will certainly do press around that and media around that when it comes out. Then there will be a re-enrollment of older applications before October. These are contracts that were first signed in 2009 and 2010. Those producers are allowed to re-enroll in CSP once for an additional 5-year contract. That will happen before October. Then the fiscal year 15 sign up for new acres under the Farm Bill will begin late in the calendar year, sometime before the new year, but perhaps after the end of the fiscal year. And then finally, contracts for those re-enrollments that I mentioned will be signed in the first quarter of the next fiscal year after October. So sort of two separate paths that are happening there concurrently. Next, I wanted to touch on the major easement program that is authorized by the Farm Bill. This is a combination of several existing easement programs. In the 2008 Farm Bill, we had the Wetlands Reserve Program, the Grassland Reserve Program, and the Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program, WRP, GRP, and FRPP. The Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, ASEP, combines those three easement programs into a single umbrella program. There will be two components, a wetland easement component and an ag lands easement component. And within the ag land easement component, that is intended to encompass both the Grassland Reserve and the Farmland Protection Program. The funding allocation between those two components is at this point unknown. So we don't know how much money within ASEP is going to go toward wetland conservation and how much money is going to go toward farmland preservation or grassland protection. That's something that groups are weighing in on, and I encourage other folks to also weigh in with NRCS on that. But we will know when, probably not until actually a rule is released. Funding for the entire program is substantially lower than it was in the 2008 Farm Bill for each individual program. So in other words, when you add up funding for the individual easement programs under the 2008 Farm Bill, that number is higher, or was higher, than the funding provided through ASEP. And that's especially true for what was the Wetlands Reserve Program. By our calculation, we expect that rather than enrolling upwards of 250,000 wetland acres per year, which was the case under WRP, we're looking at probably closer to 60,000 or 70,000 maybe wetland acres per year. So a very substantial reduction in wetland conservation. And then finally, the 7-year waiting period for landowners to enroll in WRP to sign an easement was reduced to 2 years. So in other words, producers or landowners will need to wait 2 years after acquiring the wetland before enrolling it in the ASEP, the wetland portion of ASEP. That rule was inserted into the 2008 Farm Bill initially to try to prevent land speculation. This is what we know in terms of the timeline for implementation. I have two tracks laid out here, one for wetland easements, one for ag land easements. The wetland easements will, NRCS is currently honoring contracts signed under the WRP during 2014. That was the 2008 program. Applications that were submitted in 2014, but were not turned into contracts. Those will be reconsidered under ASEP, and that's true for the ag lands easement portion as well. NRCS is currently accepting applications for the wetlands easement portion of ASEP. I don't believe that NRCS state offices are doing a lot of outreach around it, but they should be accepting applications at this point. And we expect enrollments to happen in late July. Under the ag land easements portion, existing WRP, GRP, and FRPP contracts again will be honored. NRCS will begin accepting applications on April 30th. Unlike the wetlands component, they are not yet accepting applications for ag land easements. Producers or landowners can reach out to NRCS field and state offices, submit an application under the ag lands portion of ASEP, but they will more likely than not be told that that NRCS is going to hold their application for the time being, pending new rules and guidelines. And then, like the wetlands easement component, enrollments for the ag lands easement component are expected in late July. Finally, I wanted to touch on the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. I know a lot of folks on the call today are from nonprofit organizations around the country, perhaps more so than individual farmers participating on the webinar today. So I did want to spend some time talking about the new Regional Conservation Partnership Program from a partner perspective. This is one of the new programs out of the 2014 Farm Bill, but much of it is carried over. The structure is carried over from the 2008 Farm Bill. RCPP combines several programs: the Cooperative Conservation Partnership Initiative, Agricultural Water Enhancement Program, Chesapeake Bay Watershed Initiative, and Great Lakes Conservation Initiative. It largely retains the structure of the Cooperative Conservation Partnership Initiative from the 2008 Farm Bill. RCPP is project-based, so unlike the other programs I talked about, the funding is organized around particular projects that are set up in certain areas to target specific needs. And I'll put up a list of some examples a little bit later on. NRCS enters into a partnership agreement with nonprofit organizations, state, local, or tribal governments, producer associations, farmer cooperatives, water or irrigation districts and utilities, institutes of higher education, and other groups with a history of working with farmers on conservation efforts. That's the list of eligible partners that can apply for RCPP. So partners are the ones who enter into the project agreements with NRCS. Individual producers, on the other hand, sign up for projects through other conservation programs. So this is a little strange, but if folks maybe remember back to the way CCPI worked under the 2008 Farm Bill, producers will actually go in to NRCS offices. They will either be told that there's an RCPP project in their area, or the partner will have done the necessary outreach to make a producer aware of the fact that there is a project. And that's the initial goal. The primary goal is to get the partner to actually do all that outreach and education. And then the producer signs up through EQIP, CSP, or the new Consolidated Easement Program to participate in one of those projects. But they'll administer conservation practices through those other existing programs as part of the RCP project. Now there is some flexibility built into that. NRCS will, and this is in statute in the Farm Bill, NRCS will ensure that the basic rules for the conservation programs, EQIP, CSP, and ASEP, apply, such as rules governing appeals, payment limits, and conservation compliance. But beyond those basic rules, the partnership projects, NRCS basically has the authority to make adjustments, essentially, to those programs, those programmatic rules within each of those individual programs to adjust practices or payment rates if they need to do that to better reflect the unique local circumstances or local needs, or to simplify the application and evaluation process. So producers will be largely complying with EQIP, CSP, and ASEP rules under those RCPP projects, but USDA NRCS does have some flexibility there. Funding decisions are split between state NRCS offices. 25% of the funding will go through state offices, and NRCS national headquarters, where 75% of the funding will originate. So headquarters has decision-making authority over 75% of the funding, state offices over 25% of the funding. And then of the 75% at the headquarters level, at the national level, 35% of that will go toward what are called critical conservation areas, which NRCS will designate. These are areas that NRCS considers high priority areas. So we expect that to include watersheds like the Mississippi River Basin or the Chesapeake Bay watershed and other areas of high priority. They haven't announced that list yet, but I include that in my timeline in a couple slides. Finally, the 2014 Farm Bill provides more funding for this type of partnership program than the 2008 Farm Bill. It's a substantial investment. Under the 2008 Farm Bill, $165 million was available, or would have been available in FY14, current fiscal year, for this type of partnership project-based targeting. Under the FY14 bill, $300 million is available. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, $300 million is available in FY14, and that ratio is relatively static over the years, though it does change a little bit. So what is the timeline for implementation for the partnership program? Well, we expect those critical conservation areas to be announced sometime in May, probably before the request for proposals is issued, also in May. At that point, partners will be looking through the request for proposals, figuring out what the details are, what the requirements are, and actually in advance of the proposals, it would be a great idea to come up with a concept for your project, to think about who you're going to need to be involved, who you are going to partner with, how you're going to reach out to producers, and the like, because you'll have to outline all of that in your proposal. We expect that agreements with partners will be signed sometime before next fiscal year, so before October, and then farmers will sign up for particular projects through those other conservation programs sometime after October in the next fiscal year. These are the application criteria for RCPP. Project proposals will need to include the scope of the project, a plan for monitoring, evaluation, and reporting, what resources are requested for the project, who the eligible partners will be and what their roles and responsibilities will be. There may also be additional criteria that is added by NRCS or USDA more broadly. The Farm Bill gives the Secretary of Agriculture some flexibility there in adding additional criteria. And finally, in ranking proposals, NRCS can give priority to certain projects. They can give priority to projects that assist producers in meeting or avoiding the need for regulation, that have a high percentage of producers in the area covered by the agreement, that significantly leverage non-federal financial and technical resources. On that one, partners will be expected to provide a significant contribution, is what the Farm Bill says, but significant contribution is not defined. So we expect that that NRCS will give examples in the RFP of what significant contribution is. NRCS can give priority to proposals that deliver high percentages of applied conservation, that provide innovation in conservation methods and delivery, including performance measurement. And then again, there is some flexibility for NRCS to add additional criteria. So with that, I will turn it over to Bill, and I think we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Bill, before you start, I just wanted to let folks know now is a really great time to submit your questions. Again, you can use the control panel on your webinar, GoToWebinar screen, type in your question and hit submit. And when Bill's finished, we'll start taking those questions from you. Okay, Bill, go ahead. Bill's going to talk about Farm Bill implementation and rulemaking and why the rulemaking process is so important.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, and I really appreciate Greg coming on board and explaining some of what's going on now with some of the new programs that we worked so hard to implement in the context of the debate over the 2014 Farm Bill. I thought it was really important that we kind of have this conversation for a couple of different reasons. That number one, sometimes we pass legislation, we work very hard to get programs in place and do the policy work up front, and then we sort of forget about how important it is to make sure that we stay engaged throughout the program implementation and rulemaking processes. I think that is particularly true in the context of the conservation compliance initiative that was part of the recent Farm Bill. But I also thought that having this discussion about the new regional conservation partnership program made a lot of sense, particularly for some of our chapters and our members that work diligently to make watershed restoration projects and other of those things happen in their locality, and how those this new program might be a way for them to increase their ability to do that work and engage more effectively with farmers that are interested in putting conservation on the ground. So I really appreciate Greg kind of walking us through what this new program might look like and how there may be some opportunities going down the road for particularly the Izaak Walton League to get more effectively engaged in those programs. What I would like to talk about, and you could move to the next slide if you don't mind, is to talk specifically about conservation compliance. This is a huge victory for us. It was our #1 priority in what was then the 2012 Farm Bill and what became the 2014 Farm Bill, and perhaps the duration of that debate ultimately benefited us because it enabled us to get more of our congressional allies in line in order to ensure passage. What it effectively meant is that now conservation compliance is required for producers receiving crop insurance premium subsidies. Very similarly to the old conservation compliance provisions, Swamp Buster, Sod Buster, as we've all known it in the past, producers who receive crop insurance premium subsidies who farm highly erodible lands now must develop and implement a conservation plan to minimize soil loss and are prohibited from draining wetlands for agriculture production unless they mitigate against those losses. Moving on to the next slide. There are some, and I think this is why we really need to focus on the rulemaking process as we move forward. There are some significant differences between the old Swamp Buster program as we know it and the new provisions as they relate to crop insurance and how that relates to compliance. Most importantly, farmers now remain eligible for crop insurance premium subsidies until all their appeals are exhausted, and they're held harmless for any potential violations in not complying with swamp buster and other regulations if the USDA does not take timely action on certificates of compliance and other regulatory mandates. I think that's, this kind of speaks to a larger issue that many farmers have had in the past, that they wait and wait and wait until for determinations to take place and for USDA to take action on their certificates of compliance. And this basically provides them with relief if USDA does not take timely action. As I'll point out as we move forward, I think one of the pitfalls here is that what we ultimately need to make sure of as we move forward is that we have quality wetland determinations. We can't have a major effort moving forward to just eradicate the backlog of wetland determinations that exists. We need to make sure that that the determinations are made, with a lot of accuracy and take into account particularly precipitation and rainfall data that is appropriate. We've seen in the past some determinations or an attempt to make determinations that are based on rainfall data that occur during the driest months of the year and often result in eliminating seasonal and temporary wetlands from consideration that actually should come under the provisions of conservation compliance. So this is one of the areas that we're going to be very concerned about as we move forward. The USDA doesn't try to move forward very quickly to eradicate the backlogs and not take into account the best information available for determining whether or not a wetland exists. There are another couple of issues here that are going to play out in the rulemaking context. Farmers that are found ultimately at the end of appeals, etc., to be in violation need to make an equitable contribution to the conservation fund, and we have to figure out exactly what that means. What is an equitable contribution? Those are issues that are going to play out in the context of the rulemaking debate, as are kind of the other major provision that differentiates between kind of the existing law and the new law on as it relates to crop insurance, and that's if there are less than 5 acres of an entire farm that are involved in conversion to agriculture production, the farmer can ultimately contribute 150% of the cost of mitigation instead of restoring the wetland and or mitigating those losses. Those issues are going to be very important as we move forward. We're going to have to figure out whether or not what are the true costs of mitigation? How do you arrive at that calculation, and a lot of those issues are going to be played out in the rulemaking process. Moving forward to the next slide. In terms of what's important, I think we have to realize that these new provisions apply only to farmers receiving crop insurance program benefits. When we went into this debate 3 or 4 years ago, we all did it with an expectation that we were going to ultimately lose direct payments, counter-cyclical payments, all of those Title I programs that really bound farmers to conservation compliance. However, as a result of, I think, both the economic conditions that are playing out, the decline in where we are in terms of crop prices, and a variety of other reasons, there are a number of new programs that have been put into place in Title I that actually are going to bind farmers to the old provisions of Swamp Buster and Sod Buster, and we've got to realize that these new provisions that we worked very hard to put in place really apply only to a very narrow group of producers who are only claiming crop insurance premium subsidies under the new law. I think that the other thing that is very important, and I think one of the things that we need to make sure that the USDA communicates to their producers and to the agencies that deal with producers is that these provisions took effect immediately upon passage of the 2014 Farm Bill. I think there's a sense that that none of this happens until the rulemaking is finalized, and that therefore, farmers can basically begin to, kind of, I don't want to say take advantage of the program, but if they are considering draining wetlands or converting grasslands, etc., that they've got to pass until the new rules go into effect, and that's not the case. Finally, and I think it's kind of what I started out saying before, is we need to make sure that as we move down the road on this rulemaking process, that we ultimately get quality wetland determinations based on the best available information available, and that the priority cannot be just to clear the backlog that exists, and that as we start to look forward into potential options in mitigation, that we factor in all of the potential costs that are involved. I think those will be the major considerations that we have as a community as we move down the road on the rulemaking process. Going on to the last slide, I think it's really important that we don't sit back and just allow this discussion to happen inside the Beltway, behind closed doors, and wait to see how this rulemaking process plays out. We need to remain actively engaged, talking to our congressional delegations, asking them to figure out how things are going. Are they keeping in contact with USDA as this rulemaking process goes down the road. It's very similar to the same kinds of activities and campaigns we organize throughout the Farm Bill debate, and I think it's even more important that we continue to ask these questions of our congressional leaders in the context of this rulemaking, because all too often we're in a situation where a lot of the rulemaking is done behind the scenes without a whole lot of transparency, and by keeping our congressional leaders engaged allows us to show a little bit more light on the process and make sure that what was originally contemplated in the legislation is what ultimately plays out in the rulemaking process. The last suggestion, and I would encourage all folks to do this, is to participate in state technical committee discussions. A lot of how Farm Bill programs, whether it's those that Greg was talking about earlier, or some of the things that are going to be involved in this rulemaking process, all of these will be kind of played out, and discussions will be made on a state-by-state basis that involve these state technical committees. And I would encourage folks to participate, attend wherever possible, and that's one very positive way that we can ensure that the victories that we won in the Farm Bill will be realized in the rulemaking process. Basically, that's about all I have. Certainly want to leave time for questions, and I'll turn this back to Jennifer and Greg.
Great, thanks, Bill. Greg, first of all, I wondered if you had anything to add to Bill's comments about the rulemaking process and what's most important from your perspective and NSAC's perspective in rulemaking.
Well, I think Bill covered it pretty well. You know, the most important thing is to remain engaged somehow. You know, be tapped in somehow, either through the Izaak Walton League, or if you are an organization with a DC branch or arm, you know, through your own organization or through NSAC. SustainableAgriculture.net is our website. Bill's right that many of the decisions will be made even before the interim final rules are released, which is by and large later this fiscal year. That means the early fall, probably, maybe even over the summer. But before that, you know, we can be contacting our legislators, those who helped us get these changes into the Farm Bill, asking them to be engaged. We can be doing our own outreach to farmers and ranchers and others who have a stake in the process. We can be doing calls into the department, joint comments, memos before the interim final rules are released, coming to DC to do meetings, and of course getting involved through your state technical committees. I think Bill's absolutely right that the STCs are, that's one of the ways that NRCS makes many of its locally led decisions. And within STCs there are local working groups as well at the field level. So you can get involved in the local working groups or the state technical committees to help NRCS make some of these decisions.
Great, thanks, Greg. Hey, Bill, how do people find out when their state technical committees are meeting? Where do folks learn about what's going on at their local level with those committees?
Well, I mean, typically the state conservationists will have a website that will, you know, kind of alert folks to you know, state technical committee activities and the agendas for those committees. If they're not posted for any particular reason, folks can always give me a buzz or send me an email, and we'll figure out a way to hook them up with the information that they need to engage with the state technical committees or the work groups that Greg was discussing.
Great, thanks. So we have a question here, and I'll let you two decide who wants to answer it. What would be the benefit of enrolling in CSP over CRP and vice versa?
Do you want me to take that, Bill?
I would appreciate it.
All right, and then you can fill in behind me if you'd like. So the big difference between the two programs, CSP, Conservation Stewardship, and CRP, Conservation Reserve, is that the CSP is a working lands program, and CRP is a for years it's been called a land retirement program, but it really is more about managing lands that are not necessarily in agriculture production, so managing woodlands or grasslands that you plant, and over longer periods, so they're long-term contracts. CSP is more focused on putting conservation practices, specific activities, onto working farm or ranch lands or forest lands. So implementing a resource conserving crop rotation or advanced integrated pest management, that sort of thing. They're 5-year contracts. They're whole farm contracts, so you enroll your entire your entire farm, all fields, and you target your conservation to priority resource concerns, so water quality, and within that nutrient reduction or sediment reduction, soil quality, and within that soil compaction, or there are a number of levels of targeting. But the focus in CSP is on working farmlands and practices, comprehensive conservation, and CRP, the reserve program, is more focused on long-term management of woodlands or grasslands or land with other perennial cover.
And Greg, while you were answering that, George, our participant who asked the question, had a follow-up, and he said, I asked because Greg mentioned the fear of folks not re-enrolling in CRP if they get priority in the CSP process.
Yep, right. So that transition was built in for people who want to enroll their expiring CRP land in working land conservation. So if someone wants to start grazing on former CRP land that's expiring from a 15-year contract, say, they can transition into the CSP program to make sure that conservation stays on that land.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have a question about the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. The participant is wondering if participation in that means going through National Environmental Protection Act analysis, or do the projects proposed under the RCPP need NEPA analysis?
That's a really good question. I actually don't know the answer. My guess would be that you would not need to go through any type of NEPA analysis. I imagine that if that were necessary, it would be done at the program level, not at the project level. But I don't know for sure, so I'll have to look into that. I don't have my email address up here, but you can go to our website, sustainableagriculture.net, to find my contact info, and you can shoot me an email. I can help you try to figure that out.
Okay. And Bill, you mentioned people could email you. Do you also want to share your email address or how people can find you?
Sure. It's bwenzel, W-E-N-Z as in zebra, E-L, at iwla.org. Great.
And Greg, with the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, you mentioned the need for participants in that to leverage non-federal financial and technical resources. Are you guys at all concerned that that could be an obstacle to people participating in that program?
Yes, we're very concerned about that, and this is part of the reason that maybe it would not require a NEPA analysis. I guess the two are kind of tied together because it's not federal dollars going to a project, right? This is farmers are enrolling through existing conservation programs, EQIP, CSP, and ASEP. That's where the money goes. The money doesn't go to the project partner. But yes, we are concerned about that because what it does is it makes it very difficult for smaller organizations in particular that have a lot to offer, a lot to bring to the table, to put forward a successful project proposal because they may not be able to leverage the funds or bring to the table the same level of funding that a much larger organization could. We agree that partners certainly need to bring something to the table, but I think the important distinction is between dollars and other forms of expertise and resources. So I think we're hopeful that the RFP will include some language that allows for partners to bring their expertise and their significant investment in outreach and education and technical assistance to the table as a significant contribution. That's a really good question, though.
Great, thank you. And so I wanted to close and give you each another word about rulemaking. You guys both between you covered a lot of ground about the importance of rulemaking and the schedule. So I'm wondering if you can kind of reiterate what's first up in terms of rulemaking and what will the two of you and your organizations be focusing on first, and what would you like help from the public focusing on first as we go into the spring and summer?
Do you want to take that one first, Bill?
Yeah, you can go ahead, Greg. I think mine is a little more narrow than yours is.
So we will be again. We cover. We work on many programs. So we will be across programs and agencies within USDA, monitoring the process as things move forward. Part of it is gathering information, right, to make sure that we are tapped into the decision-making process so that we know when decisions are going to be made. That's the first step. And a lot of information at this point is still unknown. The second piece of our strategy is getting into NRCS and other USDA agencies early and often. We've already been doing meetings with program managers and others higher up that are making decisions to talk about our priorities as they relate to these programs. We need to get in early because once they release their interim final rules for these programs, many of the decisions will already have been made, despite public comments being taken at that point. The third phase would be the IFRs, the interim final rules, which we expect, again, sometime yet this fiscal year for the most part. And there will be a public comment period on those interim final rules. We will be submitting comments as a coalition. We will be working with our member groups on that. NSAC has a little over 100 groups across the country that we work with on policy and programs. So we'll be developing comments on those IFRs. And then the final phase would be education and outreach, making sure that folks know what's going on when funding through these programs is available, and in some cases that's before the IFRs are released. So USDA has broad authority right now to administer programs under existing rules, so long as those rules comply for the most part with statute, with the new 2014 Farm Bill. So many of the programs they're currently implementing, and that's why it's important to get in early. The big changes, though, we'll have to wait until those interim final rules happen. They can't move forward with those major changes that contradict the 2014 Farm Bill unless they do this rulemaking process.
Great, thanks. Bill, do you have anything to add?
Only to the extent that I reiterate some of my previous points, that we want to make sure that we maintain the contacts with our legislative leaders that we made throughout the course of the Farm Bill debate. I think it's really important that we send at least two messages. One, that we need quality wetland determinations, that the goal is not merely eradicating the backlog, that we have to use as good a data as exists in making those wetland determinations, and that should be the bottom line as we move forward in both this process and with figuring out where we need to go with the Swamp Buster program. I think it's also important that that there's a lot of discussion about what are the true costs of mitigation. Mitigation is always an alternative that is available, and I think we need to make sure that we engage our congressional delegation and NRCS on these issues to ensure that all of those costs are brought into consideration as we move forward in the rulemaking process. And I guess lastly, I would really like to see more engagement in the state technical committees. It's a tough process. Largely, it's a discussion that's controlled by farm and commodity groups, but to have active voices in the room that are talking about our issues make a huge difference as we move forward. So I would encourage folks to participate in those processes, and if they need any more information about how to get engaged and how to participate, I'd be more than happy to provide them with that. The only other point that I'd make, which is a little bit outside the context of the discussion that we've had, is that even though we just got a Farm Bill passed, which provided mandatory funding for many of the programs which are near and dear to our heart, there's already discussion about taking money away during the appropriations process and cutting those levels of support, particularly in the area of the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. I don't think we can see any more cuts. Greg talked about the potential losses in enrollments, and so we not only need to be engaged in some of these rulemaking and Farm Bill implementation processes, but we also need to remain engaged throughout the appropriations process to ensure that the funding that we thought we would have for the programs that we fought for during the Farm Bill are fully funded during the course of the next few years. Those would be the only big takeaways that I would provide at this point.
Terrific. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, Greg. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We've been recording this webinar, and we will make it available to all of the people who are registered via email, and we will also make it available via social media, via Facebook and Twitter, and you see the Izaak Walton League channels here. You can also find the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition on both Facebook and Twitter. Thanks to everyone again for joining us, and have a great Tuesday.
Thanks much.